The Jeep sat in the center of the motor pool like a coffin someone had dressed up as a joke. Hood propped open, battery cables dangling, a puddle of old coolant spreading slowly across the cracked asphalt in the August heat of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And standing beside it, arms crossed, wearing a pressed performance polo and $500 tactical boots that had never once touched actual dirt, was a 26-year-old staff sergeant named Derek Holloway, grinning the way young men grin when they already know the ending of a story. The old man hadn't arrived yet, but the crowd had. 43 Marines, motor pool instructors, a handful of lance corporals who'd snuck away from a cleaning detail, 2 mechanics from the civilian contractor side of the fence. All of them leaning against chain link or sitting on equipment lockers, phones out, recording. Someone had written on the whiteboard above the bay doors in thick red marker, 9 minutes or go home. 9 minutes. That was the wager. Someone in the barracks the night before had made the claim, had said that old Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Pruitt, retired, 68 years old, current civilian instructor for combat vehicle operator training at Lejeune, could diagnose and field fix any mechanical failure on a military vehicle faster than any active-duty wrench-turner alive. Someone else had laughed. Holloway had pulled out his wallet. $500, he said. More than that, he said. I'll double it if the old man can get that specific Jeep running in 9 minutes. Because that specific Jeep, a 1990 AM General M151A2 utility vehicle that the motor pool used for training evolutions, had been rigged. 3 separate, deliberate failures planted by Holloway and 2 buddies from the 2nd Maintenance Battalion, men who knew engines the way surgeons know anatomy. They had disconnected the rotor inside the distributor cap and reinstalled the cap perfectly clean. They had crimped the primary fuel line behind the firewall where no one would look first, and they had pulled and hidden the inline fuse for the starter relay, replacing it with one that looked intact but carried a hairline crack through the element. 3 failures, each one invisible at a glance, each one chosen to waste time. Holloway had timed the fastest of his guys fixing all 3, 11 minutes, 20 seconds. That was with knowing what the failures were. He was not worried about a 68-year-old man. The money sat in an envelope on the folding table by the whiteboard. $1,000, because 2 other Marines had matched Holloway's bet, liking the odds. The envelope was sealed with a piece of masking tape, and someone had drawn a small skull on it in ballpoint pen. Raymond Pruitt walked through the side door of the motor pool at 7:44 in the morning. He was not what anyone who hadn't met him expected. He wasn't tall, he wasn't broad. He wore olive drab work pants and a faded gray USMC t-shirt with a small bleach stain near the left pocket, and on his head was a cover, a utility cover, old woodland pattern, the kind that hadn't been standard issue in 20 years. His hair beneath it was white, not silver. White the way snow is white, clean and absolute. He moved without hurry across the bay floor, stepping around a transmission dolly with the automatic ease of a man who has spent more hours in motor pools than in living rooms. His hands were already out of his pockets. They were large hands for a small man. The knuckles were knotted. The left thumb angled slightly wrong, the joint broken and reset a long time ago. He looked at the Jeep. He looked at the whiteboard. He looked at the envelope on the table. He did not look at Holloway. Holloway pushed off the chain link and walked over. "Gunny Pruitt." He said it the way young men say a title when they mean to take something away from it. "We weren't sure you'd show. Figured maybe you had a nap scheduled." A few people laughed. Pruitt didn't answer. He walked to the front of the Jeep and stood there. Just stood, looking at the engine the way a man looks at a page of writing in a language he learned before he learned to walk. 9 minutes on the clock, Holloway said, louder now, playing to the audience. "You need us to get you a chair?" More laughter. Pruitt reached into the chest pocket of his t-shirt and pulled out a pair of reading glasses, thin wire frames. He put them on without ceremony and leaned over the engine bay. 43 people watched him look at an engine for 11 seconds without touching a thing. Then he reached down and picked up the jumper cables that were hanging there from the battery terminal, and he set them aside, not because they were part of the problem, but because they were in the way. The motion was so natural it looked like breathing. He pressed 2 fingers against the firewall, tracing something. His lips moved once, soundlessly. Then he straightened up, turned, and walked to the driver's side door. Someone near the back of the crowd said, "Is he just getting in?" He was not just getting in. He reached under the dash, left hand, no flashlight, not looking, and found the fuse box cover. He pulled it with 1 finger. He did not search through the fuses. He went straight to the starter relay circuit, 3rd row, 2nd from the left, and he pulled that fuse out and held it up to the light coming through the cracked windshield. 7 seconds of silence. He set the fuse on the seat beside him, reached into his pants pocket and produced a small tin that had once held throat lozenges, but now held exactly what it always held. 3 spare automotive fuses of assorted amperage, 2 rubber O-rings, a brass fitting, a strip of electrical tape, and a straightened length of safety wire. He had carried that tin since 1987. He selected a 15-amp fuse without looking at the label, he knew by the color, and seated it in the relay socket with a single, definitive push. He was out of the Jeep in under 90 seconds. The crowd had gone quiet. The laughter was gone. Holloway's arms were still crossed, but his jaw had stopped moving. Pruitt moved to the left side of the engine bay. He ran his right hand along the primary fuel line from the pump housing toward the firewall, moving slowly, the way you'd read Braille. Halfway. 3/4. Then his fingers stopped. He pressed. He held the pressure for 3 seconds, feeling the material of the line, the give, the restriction. He unclipped a small multi-tool from his belt, the kind with needle-nose pliers that folded inside, and he worked the crimp out of the fuel line, straightening the wall of the rubber without cutting it, without replacing it. 40 seconds. The line was clear. He walked around to the front and opened the distributor cap with 2 fingers, looked inside, placed the cap on the air filter housing face up, very carefully, as if it were a piece of equipment he might need again and did not want to scratch. He looked at the rotor seat. He reached into the tin, the throat lozenge tin, and there was nothing in there for this. He thought for 3 seconds. Then he looked at the Jeep's floor mat through the windshield. He reached in, took the floor mat, peeled back the rubber corner, found the small plastic retaining clip that held the mat to the floor stud, and pulled it free. 8 millimeters. He bent it once, between his thumb and finger, testing the flex. He seated it as a rotor tab bridge, pressing it flush. He replaced the distributor cap. He stood up straight. He took a breath. He looked at nobody. He walked to the driver's side, sat down, and turned the key. The M151A2 started on the first crank. The sound of that engine catching, that rough, immediate bark of a 40-year-old military utility vehicle coming back to life, hit the crowd before anyone had time to process what they'd watched. There was a half-second of pure silence, the kind that happens when the brain has received information that it has not yet organized into a reaction. And then one of the lance corporals in the back said softly, "No way." And someone else said, "How long was that?" The man with the phone, who had been recording, looked at his screen. He'd had a stopwatch running. His mouth moved. He looked up. 8 minutes, 51 seconds. The envelope on the table contained $1,000. The skull, drawn in ballpoint pen, looked slightly less confident than it had before. Holloway hadn't moved. His arms were still crossed. Around him, the crowd was buzzing, but not the way it had been buzzing before. Not with the loose, prearranged noise of a sure thing. With something else, something between disbelief and the early edge of recognition. the way a room sounds when it's just realized it has been wrong about something important. Holloway walked to the Jeep. Pruitt had turned the engine off. He was sitting with both hands on his thighs, looking straight ahead through the cracked windshield at the whiteboard with the words 9 minutes or go home still written in red. "How did you know about the fuse?" Holloway said. His voice was different, not smaller exactly, but different. Pruitt looked at him for a moment before answering. "The cables were staged," he said. "Cables don't fail that clean, so the battery was fine. If the battery was fine and the Jeep wouldn't turn over, the relay was first place to look." He paused. "I looked. The fuel line, you went right to it. Run your hand along a fuel line in a rigged vehicle and you'll find the crimp inside 30 seconds, assuming you've done it before." "And the rotor?" Pruitt looked at the whiteboard again. "The distributor cap was clean," he said. "Not dirty clean, clean. Someone had opened it recently. So." Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You weren't supposed to be able to do that." "I know. Those were 3 separate failures." "I know." Holloway looked at the engine bay. He looked at the floor mat with its corner peeled back and the retaining clip missing. Then he looked at Pruitt, and there was something moving across his face that hadn't been there when the morning started. Something he didn't have the vocabulary for yet, but that was working its way toward the surface whether he wanted it to or not. "Who taught you that?" Holloway said. "The tin, the fuse, all of it?" Pruitt got out of the Jeep. He stood at his full height, which was not impressive in feet and inches, but was something else entirely in the way he occupied space. He took his reading glasses off, folded them, put them back in his shirt pocket. "A staff sergeant named Delgado," he said. "Dong Ha, Vietnam, 1971. He could fix anything that moved with whatever was in his pockets. The man never carried a full toolbox in his life." Pruitt looked at the engine one last time, the way you look at something you've understood for a long time. He didn't make it home, but what he knew did. The motor pool was quiet, in a way it hadn't been all morning. Not the quiet of boredom or the quiet of waiting. The quiet of a room full of people who have just heard something that requires them to recalibrate. Holloway reached into his pocket and pulled out an additional $200 in cash, his own money, above the envelope, and set it on the hood of the Jeep. Nobody had asked him to do it. "For your time," he said, and he said it without edge, without performance. He said it the way you say something when you mean it, and you know the person you're saying it to will understand the difference. Pruitt looked at the money. He looked at Holloway. "Keep it," he said. "Buy a service manual. Read the fuel system section." He picked up his multi-tool from where he'd set it on the air filter housing, clipped it back onto his belt. "Read all the sections." He walked toward the side door. He was almost through it when one of the lance corporals, 19 years old, maybe 20, sitting on the equipment locker with his phone still in his hand, said, "Gunny, what unit were you with?" Pruitt stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, it was slow, like a man deciding something. "3rd Battalion, 1st Marines," he said. "And before that, 3rd Marine Division, I Corps. And before that, wherever they needed someone who could keep the machines running." He looked at the lance corporal for a moment. "Why do you ask?" "I'm trying to figure out how long you've been doing this." Pruitt thought about it. 51 years, he said, give or take. He pushed through the door and was gone. The motor pool stayed quiet for another few seconds. Then it filled with sound, not the loose mocking sound from before, but the kind of sound that happens when people are trying to talk about something that doesn't quite have words yet. 2 of the mechanics from the civilian contractor side went over to the Jeep and looked at the distributor cap and the fuel line and the fuse box. They looked at the floor mat. One of them picked up the retaining clip that Pruitt had used as a rotor tab bridge, turned it over in his fingers, and said something quietly to the other man that nobody else caught. Holloway stood by the Jeep for a while longer. He was thinking about something. It was visible on him the way weather is visible before it arrives, the tightness around the jaw, the way his eyes had stopped moving. He picked up the extra $200 from the hood. He held it for a moment, then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, and he walked to the whiteboard and erased 9 minutes or go home with the heel of his hand. He didn't write anything else. What nobody in that motor pool knew that morning, except the 2 mechanics from the contractor side who had done their research, was who Raymond Earl Pruitt actually was. The faded t-shirt and the old utility cover and the reading glasses had arranged the picture in a certain way, and everyone had looked at the picture and believed it. The picture was not wrong, but it was incomplete. Raymond Pruitt had enlisted in the Marine Corps in July of 1974, 2 months after Saigon fell, because he'd grown up in Beaufort, South Carolina, the son of a Korean War veteran, and the Corps was the only thing he'd ever wanted. He went through basic at Paris Island in the last summer heat of August 1974, and he was not a natural shooter or a natural athlete or a natural anything. But he had a gift for machines that his drill instructors noticed inside the first 2 weeks. They noticed it the way you notice something when it exceeds the category you thought you were measuring. He went to motor transport school at Camp Lejeune. He went to the Fleet Marine Force. He deployed. He served. He learned. And then, in 1983, he deployed to Lebanon as part of the multinational force, and he was a staff sergeant by then, assigned to vehicle maintenance in support of the 24th Marine Amphibious Unit. He was in the motor pool on the morning of October 23, 1983, when the truck bomb hit the barracks at Beirut International Airport. He was 400 meters away. He felt the pressure wave before he heard the sound. He spent the next 36 hours in the rubble with hand tools and a hydraulic jack and a field medical kit, working beside corpsmen and engineers and whoever else was there, doing what needed to be done with what was available. 241 Americans died that day. Pruitt could not fix that, but he worked on what he could reach. He came home with a Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V and a hearing loss in his left ear that he never fully recovered. He stayed in. He made Gunnery Sergeant. He served 22 years total before he retired, and then he spent the next 4 years consulting for a private defense contractor before the contractor closed its training division, and he took the job at Lejeune because someone called and asked, and the work was still there to be done, and his hands still knew how to do it. He was not famous. His file existed in a drawer in Quantico. His service record was clean and precise, and would mean nothing to a 26-year-old staff sergeant in a performance polo who had never deployed past Kuwait. The 2 mechanics from the contractor's side knew. They had been in the motor pool that October morning. One of them as a boot lance corporal just arrived in country, the other as a corporal with 6 months deployed. They had both seen Pruitt work that day. They had never forgotten it. And when they'd recognized him 3 months ago at the training facility, they'd said nothing. Just watched and waited and done their research. And this morning they had driven 40 minutes to Camp Lejeune because they wanted to see what a room full of young men looked like when they finally understood. They looked like this. One of them, the older one, a wide man named Kowalski with reading glasses of his own now and a knee that had been rebuilt twice, found Holloway near the whiteboard that afternoon. He handed him a photocopy. It was a scan of a unit citation, the text faded but readable, dated November 1983. Pruitt's name appeared in the 3rd paragraph, after the names of 2 officers and before the names of 2 other enlisted men. Holloway read it standing up. He read it twice. When he looked up, Kowalski was already walking away. Holloway found Pruitt in the classroom building at 5 o'clock. The old man at the front of an empty room, cleaning up the diagrams from the day's combat vehicle operator session, laminated sheets of engine cutaways and electrical schematics, stacked with the same care he gave every piece of equipment he touched. The fluorescent light in the room buzzed softly. Outside, the late afternoon heat was finally breaking. Holloway knocked on the open door. Pruitt looked up. Holloway held up the photocopy. Pruitt looked at it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he went back to stacking his laminated sheets. "I was doing my job," he said. "Gunny, you were in the rubble for 36 hours. A lot of men were in the rubble for 36 hours. Holloway was quiet. He held the photocopy at his side. Outside, 2 lance corporals were crossing the parade ground, their voices carrying briefly and then fading. "I owe you an apology," Holloway said. "You don't." "I do, and I'm making it." Holloway took a breath. He had the expression of a man putting down something heavy that he has been carrying at an awkward angle. "I set that vehicle up to make you fail. I said things in front of 40 people that I should not have said. And I did it because I looked at you and I thought I knew what I was looking at." Pruitt set the last laminated sheet on the stack. He straightened it. He looked at Holloway. "How long have you been in?" he said. 7 years. "Do you love it?" Holloway didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Good." Pruitt picked up the stack of sheets and set them in the storage bin along the wall. "Then pay attention to what happened today. Not the wager, not the Jeep. Pay attention to what you assumed and where that assumption came from, and what it cost you to be wrong." He turned off the projector. "That's worth more than a service manual." Holloway nodded. He stood there another moment with the photocopy in his hand, and then he set it carefully on the front table, left it there for whoever might find it or for nobody, and he walked out through the door. The fluorescent light buzzed in the empty room. Pruitt stood in the quiet for a moment before turning it off. Outside, the sky over Camp Lejeune was doing what August skies do in North Carolina, going orange and heavy at the edges, the air cooling by 2 degrees, the smell of cut grass and diesel and the distant salt of the Atlantic working through the compound in a slow, indifferent tide. He walked to his truck, a 1994 Ford F-150, dark green, high mileage, maintained to a standard that would have passed any motor pool inspection on the first try, and he sat in the cab without starting it for a moment. From the glove compartment, he took out a photograph. It was not new. The edges were soft with handling, and the color had shifted toward yellow the way photographs do when they've been carried for decades. It showed 2 men in